stalwart that he was, and he would be known if somebody in this town of Ahmedabad, Chatterjee sir, if somebody talks about an economist, they will talk about Dr. R.L. Sanghvi. So a man, of course, a professor again, professor at AU, but erstwhile the AU was HL College, he was a HL College principal. So thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. An important lecture today. We have the best of the faculty today for our lecture. And to be honest, I was to leave after introducing, but I told my wife that I'm not leaving because I'm too keen to listen to this gentleman, because he's bringing to us a lot of insights naturally with his profile that we know. But before that, I'll just give you a background of Dr. R.L. Sanghvi's this endowment program. And Dr. R.L. Sanghvi himself. So he was a Fulbright. Now we lost him before a few years. A Fulbright scholar and a former principal of HL College of Commerce, where I studied. I proudly feel so that I was there, and envisioned a broader engagement with economics beyond academia for the public benefit. His dedication to this cause led to the creation of this lecture series, which has since brought economic theories and practices closer to the public through discourses led by India and the world's top economists. And this is the 19th in the series that this lecture is. One of our AMA's notable initiatives is this annual lecture, R.L. Sanghvi Endowment, which has become an esteemed platform for discussing critical economic issues. And certainly today's issue is as important on the relating it to AI for global health. The inaugural lecture took place in 1997, and since then we have hosted 18 insightfuls. Today is the 19th of them. Sessions on by various economists, public policy experts, thought leaders, and many more. Some of the last 4-5 speakers have been Mr. Arun Maira, the former member Planning Commission, and of course several of Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, former Deputy Chairman Planning Commission, Shri Subhash Chandra Garg, Secretary Department of Economic Affairs, Dr. Krishnamurthy, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, Professor Ravindra Dholakia, noted economist and former professor of economics and public systems at IIMA, and Mr. Yamal Vyas, the chairman of 4th State Finance Commission of Gujarat. So we have had wonderful sessions, too much to take away, and certainly this has been a sought after for those who are interested in understanding the economics and the trends that are happening. So we try to make sure that this is more related to the current situation, current affairs also. Today we have with us Professor Chirantan Chatterjee, and I'm very happy to introduce him. Professor Chatterjee, we call it FRECon or FreeCon?
It's a new thing.
FRECon. I'm learning that how do I say FRECon, FRCA, FSA is a professional development, economics, innovation, and global health at the University of Sussex Business School. He also holds visiting positions at Max Planck Institute of Innovation and Competition, Munich, and Ahmedabad University. A founding fellow of the Royal Economic Society and fellow of Royal Society of Arts. He previously served at IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Bangalore, and ISB. His interdisciplinary research spans development, innovation, pharmaceutical economics, and global health, with publications in management science, Journal of Development Economics, Health Economics, and many more. He has advised the World Health Organization, World Bank, and UN bodies, and has delivered global keynotes with AI, vaccine policy, and health innovation. Dr. Chatterjee holds a PhD from Carnegie Mellon University and is deeply committed to mentoring scholars and advancing inclusive evidence-based policy. And of course, yes, IIT Roorkee, IIM Kolkata, and many more that he is. So thank you, Professor Dr. Chatterjee. We are very happy to have you here once again. Thank you and we want you to come as often as you can to give us these insights on what is happening. And certainly today's topic is something that, and we are also YouTube live, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people who would be witnessing or having this program, watching this program live. So thank you once again as a token of remembrance and thanking you. So over to you. Would you like to take it from there or here? How are you? Yes, your comfort.
I might walk around, but
Yes. So then you want the mic to walk around?
no, it's okay. I can stand there and
Howsoever, there's a microphone here also. If you want to use it.
it's okay. Let's do it here.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also to Ahmedabad Management Association for the invitation to the 19th Sangvi Endowment Lecture. Um, it's actually really an honor because just like societies are under lots of disruptive effects from artificial intelligence, as we'll discuss today, even economics for that matter is under some disruptive influence, because we don't know how AI will change the job market, what kind of policies we'll need. And in that world, when you have a former respected economist endowing a lecture and you're giving me the task of talking about what I want to talk today, it's really a pleasure. Thank you so very much, AMA, and also to explicitly Unmesh Bhai, Savan Bhai, and Mr. Mohal, and the board members whom I met today. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. So the plan today is to talk about what was highlighted as going to be the title for the talk, but I asked ChatGPT, full disclosure, to give me a title. Okay, so and the title came as Code, Care, and the Curve. Okay, and so I said, okay, maybe this can be a book that can be written. So let me structure my slides as like 11 slides, each of which is basically a book chapter. Okay, and we'll try to keep things intimate and personal, and my story in Ahmedabad, not just the recent past, but many years back when I was a 20-year-old and visited the city for the first time. We'll start there and we'll end in the discussions around how to think about health policy for the developing world with lessons from India as the concluding chapter. And if there's a publisher in the room, we can chat about a contract as well. All right. All right. Um, 25 years of Ahmedabad, I think, is the story in a nutshell for me. 2001 earthquake, that was the summer when I first visited Ahmedabad, was interviewing for the PGP interviews at IMA. And it's just after the earthquake. That's the time when things changed in terms of the cities and the state's resilience. And then, of course, several other things have happened in Gujarat and Ahmedabad since then, not no less the COVID pandemic, during which I was actually in campus just across the road in Vastrapur. And that's where I met Deepak Bhai, who was there at IMA at that time, and we started working in the middle of the pandemic on a lot of initiatives around virtual education focused on healthcare. So there's a 25-year, in some sense, association with Ahmedabad. I fondly affiliated with it. Of course, there was ICICI Bank chair and the Center for Healthcare chairpersonship at campus in Vastrapur IMA campus, but also now I am a visiting professor at Ahmedabad University. But we stand at a very interesting junction, broadly speaking, in society, where we are also need to thinking about what will happen to India in like 100 years post-independence. AMA was formed, I think, in 9 years after 1947, something like that. Yeah, I was reading up Mr. Sarabhai's journey. He came back from Cambridge in 1947 and started AMA even before, or just around the time when IMA was getting started. So there's a very, very important role that AMA can also play in this story, AMA 2.0, that you guys are discussing in the journey of India in 2047. And I would like to position this lecture and this chapter one in that vein, saying that consider this lecture as my humble submission for what AMA can do for Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and Indian healthcare in a world of AI turbulence. Okay. Having said that, we also have seen, and we repeatedly see before, during, and after the pandemic, our philosophical mindset towards healthcare. All right. Our philosophical mindset towards healthcare probably has changed today, 5 years after the pandemic, where we are more cautious about health by wish or by accident. Um, There are conversations around whether the vaccine really has side effects. Why are so many young having cardiac attacks? But there are also the structural conversations that remains in the health ecosystem, not just in India or Gujarat, but around the developing South, thinking about how can we solve all the frictions in healthcare, especially in a less privileged setting, in an inclusive fashion. And can AI be the panacea it has been looking for in solving these frictions? Okay. So the big question then is, and this was a debate that everyone is having around the world, how hard to lock down, how long to lock down, and does it affect economic outcomes when you are taking care of health as a first precedence, looking at the epidemiologists. So the big debate there was health really the wealth, or would wealth lead to health, right? And the research that gives this debate a special flavor is this particular curve coming from Preston, who basically picked up data from country time level information and correlated what is the relationship between wealth on the x-axis, GDP, and outcomes, life expectancy on the y-axis. And what you see is a couple of things to take away immediately, which is that if you are thinking of a causality where wealthy countries are supposed to be healthy, yes, in the initial stage of economic development, you do see a dramatic increase of the curve and a clustering of countries in this data set. But as you go along, you also see diminishing returns from being wealthy. So it seems like what is happening in the UK, for example, where I'm coming from today, we are not enough, we're not able to benefit the increasing returns from wealth in the context of health. So we go back to this debate that maybe the causality should go the other way, which is let's plot health on the x-axis and wealth on the y-axis and see what's happening. Because if you are not healthy enough, you're not productive enough as a household or to participate in the economy. And if that's the situation, then the economy suffers. And we are already having conversations around mental health. We are having conversations around people not coming back to work enough, et cetera, et cetera. And the health expenditure as a share of GDP is not ramping up enough in country contexts like India, et cetera. So I want to start my chapter 2 of the book. Again, this is a shout out to potential publishers on this debate around health and wealth, okay? Because that's where artificial intelligence comes in. If artificial intelligence can change the flavor of this debate from being wealth to health rather than from health to wealth, then there's a problem, because in that world we might end up creating interventions through AI for health only for those who can access certain types of interventions. If we change it to a solution story which is societally oriented through artificial intelligence, and I'll give examples, I'll take your questions on it, I think we can then create a more sustainably productive economy, and that's where economic development, etc., comes in. So that's my second submission in chapter 2, all right? Now, I will then directly jump into artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, if you look around the world, there are two types of people coming up with artificial intelligence and their thoughts around artificial intelligence broadly, not just healthcare. There are people who are super anxious. Am I going to lose my jobs? How is my task going to change in terms of how I deliver services? What is the government going to do to reskill me for continuing education? How is the government going to create a universal basic income scheme for short run problems I will go through as the structure changes? The global consulting industry, a lot of my former students are working in the big four consulting firms. The big consulting industries are under trouble. The legal industry is under trouble. The healthcare industry, of course, the doctors are under trouble because they feel like if you can feed a ECG report or an X-ray machine, like I was talking with Mr. Sarabhai today, you can actually intelligently prompt an artificial intelligence intervention to get solutions or at least a treatment pathway that may not need a doctor right away. So the doctor is legitimately worried that why should I actually go to the doctor where there are all these frictions to get appointments and you have to pay the visiting fees, and that too you have to like deal with an idiosyncratic doctor with his or her mood swings, right? So if you have an agnostic expert system that can help you in this journey in health or beyond health, maybe the story should be that we can go to that agnostic expert system. So the gentleman I'm talking about in chapter 3 is Jeff Hinton, who was actually at one time a postdoctoral scholar in artificial intelligence in Sussex, where I'm coming from today. But Jeff also got the Nobel Prize in physics, and he has been working with DeepMind and OpenAI and all the big AI entrepreneurship initiatives in the Silicon Valley, and he left his Google job, I think, because he was concerned that some of the things that are going on within the algorithmic black box seem to create the possibility of an AI that will take over human beings and the decision support systems. And what he said was this very interesting thing in 2016, and this is very moot in the conversation around healthcare. So what he said in 2016 was, or 2019, about 6 7 years back, the role of radiologists will evolve from doing perceptual things that could probably be done by a highly trained pigeon to doing far more cognitive things. Very profound statement from a guy who is basically a computer scientist, has won a physics Nobel laureate recently, but was already predicting 8 to 9 years back that certain subfields in clinical medicine are going to be so changed in the way they operate historically. Now, the fun part of this statement is that you still see radiologists having lost their jobs 8 or 9 years down the line after the statement. They're still around. Yes, they are anxious. Yes, their tasks are being complemented by AI interventions. Yes, there are some pigeons around them that work with them to give some solutions to patients, but radiology is still around. The lesson, therefore, is that it's not as 0 1 in the way Jeff Hinton was predicting. So there has to be a calibration, and the calibration will have to come from health policy in the way the tasks will change in certain clinical subfields. And then after that, what will happen to the older experts, the human experts, how they complement the new tasks for which comes from the AI expert system is the direction of travel that is going to happen with AI and healthcare in general. And certain fields are more exposed in some sense in the clinical and health context. Some fields are less so. Some of us here are stalwarts from the pharmaceutical world. So there's a lot of conversations around drug repurposing getting accelerated with artificial intelligence. There are AI startups like In Silico Medicine who are working with just artificial intelligence and old drug target libraries to see if they can find new solutions for old diseases from validated targets in a faster fashion, such that they can get molecules which are quickly going to solve some unsolved diseases of the world. And you can launch it vis-a-vis, let's say, the big discovery club that is there in the innovation space in the big pharma world in some sense. So I think there, the generic pharmaceutical industry in India has a great opportunity to use and work with tech and so our software competence to create new solutions that are faster and in some sense cheaper, inclusive for the, especially the developing world, to give solutions that are more democratic and disease solving rather than monopoly creating. So that's my message in chapter 3, that it's not like you have to be a doomsday mongerer. Neither is it like you have to sit lazy and think like my job is not going to be touched. My job as a professor is going to be touched in 5 years down, 5 years time. So I have to be very alert in continuing education, embracing AI such that I can complement AI in my classroom, in my case study discussions, da da da. So that's my chapter 3. This brings us to a question around trust. Okay, the question around trust is that this is very classical. Okay, so this goes back to an old law in economics, which is called the Say's law. And the Say's law says that basically supply creates its own demand. So long as you have an AI engine which solves a disease or gives you quick solutions on homeopathy or allopathy, helps you read pictures, x-rays, scans quickly, it will quickly take over and find its demand in the market. You don't need to worry about demand. But empirically, when that theory from Jean-Baptiste Say has been tested, we have seen always that supply does not always meet demand. There's a supply-demand mismatch. And this is where you start thinking about the behavioral issues in how we are responding in the supply-demand story in the Say's law. So I have a paper which picks up this supply side story, that amazing advancements are happening, as we can see in pharmaceutical patenting, especially post COVID-19, on how artificial intelligence is diffusing in discovery innovation work in pharma. It's not med devices, it's not healthcare broadly, but just pharma patents. But I also have a paper on the demand side where people are not able to trust algorithms enough. Okay, so the paper that I'm showing you now is a paper where one of my former students actually has a digital mental health startup, and we worked with him to nudge potential patients who need help on the psychiatric side with algorithms and with human beings, and we found that they could not trust algorithms enough. Okay, so the broad message here is of trust that I was trying to pick up from Jeff Hinton's point, which is that you may think that you can pour millions of dollars and create the next big AI startup, but so long as this trust issue is not resolved, Say's law is not going to receive fruition empirically in the ecosystem, which is where an important role comes from potentially policymakers, science, and also academics like us who will continuously create evidence to show what are the margins at where you can trust, where are the margins you have to be more cautious trying to solve Say's law in the ecosystem. Okay, so this brings us to the big question of market failure in the conversation around artificial intelligence and healthcare, and this is where I'm going to try to argue in my chapter 4 that there is a need for solvers of the trust failure that is potentially going to impact the market failure in the ecosystem. And the solvers would potentially be citizens and society and public sector and not-for-profit entities. Solvers will also have to be policymakers. For example, we might need a liability regime that could take care of unintended consequences for AI in general and AI in healthcare. Or let's say, just like the pharma world has a pharmacovigilance system, we need an AI vigilance system post-launch in terms of interventions. So policymakers have a very important role to create especially harmonized standards and not like a disparate, fragmented standards that are regionally different, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are of course, entrepreneurs who are constantly thinking of unmet need, where are the pain points, how do you solve it, how do you scale it, what are the business models, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I have left global geopolitics at the bottom of this slide in the conversation around market failure, but that's a very important conversation too, because when you think about the way the chips, the downstream interventions are happening, the race for data centers around the world is panning out. We are basically seeing two normals coming out. One is an American normal in the race for artificial intelligence, somewhat sided with the European normal, and the other normal that's coming out is the China DeepSeek normal. And this is going to drive where countries in between, like India, South Africa, Brazil, make a choice in the way they will pick up the upstream infrastructure, the standards, the technology, the science, the innovation, the privacy standards, the responsibility quotients to solve the market failure questions. These potentially is not in the hands of companies and entrepreneurs. This is basically a national conversation where you have to think about security, you have to think about twin transition strategies. How do you manage digital transition along with all the energy consumption that happens with AI and data centers? So there will be a national twin transition strategy, and also there will have to be a global South handshake between countries, let's say on the BRIC ecosystem. So this is something we have to keep an eye out while thinking about generating trust for AI, health, and economic development, and resolving Say's law. So therefore, we run into some micro details, and I teach this at my Sussex AI Global Digital Policy module, which I engage with policymakers. There are several things here, and I can't just cover all of them, but it's important to remember a few people here in the conversation. So the first thing that I want to remember is this gentleman, Alan Turing, who basically created the first encryption machine in the middle of the World War. And helped to show that you can crack the German codes. And from there, you have this idea of a Turing test. AI is basically a machine replacing a human being. So long as it is completely and efficiently replacing human being, you can say that, well, the machine has solved or surmounted the Turing test. But Stanford economists like Eric Brynjolfsson are also saying that in the race to solve the Turing test, many startups are getting into the Turing trap because there's a hype engine going on. You're not completely solving Turing test. And in that world, you're making fake claims about your efficiency generating possibilities. And this results in all kinds of conversation in the healthcare world. For example, the radiologists versus artificial intelligence engine versus some combination of artificial intelligence and radiology. There are lots of studies around in the clinical world today whether they are generating the best type of prediction accuracies, and the false positives and the false negatives are minimized or not. Point is that the solution to whether AI will solve health and be helpful for development comes from Turing test, but the recommendation should not also get trapped in the race to use a machine to replace a human being. That's the micro conversation. The macro conversation is something that has happened in past industrial revolutions. So, and AI is just another, it's like Industrial Revolution 6.0, but before we have had other industrial revolutions. The railroads came in, electricity came in, internet came in, computers came in. In fact, Bob Solow, another Nobel laureate economist, had this famous quip who's talking about, I can see computers everywhere, but not in the productivity statistics. It's almost like I can see these machines, but I don't see the productivity benefits of this. And AI is already starting to show these concerns from the economist side that I can see everybody talking about AI. There's a lot of narrative and stuff going around AI, but where are the productivity enhancements that AI will give us at the company level, at a country level, at the household level? And the reason it doesn't happen so fast is because each industrial revolution went through its own J curve. So what is picked up here, and you can look up, I'm requesting the organizers to share my slides, but basically this is a MIT study from Brynjolfsson and his co-author showing that usually when you have these industrial revolutions, there is a pause, there's a initial downtrend in the productivity, which you see in the downtrend in this picture. And then over time, as adoption problems and frictions are solved, policymakers solve the market failures that I showed you in the previous slide, productivity enhancement starts happening with a lag. So you get this J type of a curve for every industrial revolution. You can expect that with AI as well, just like Bob Solow was grumpy about seeing computers everywhere and not finding it in the productivity statistics. And that's something that I wanted to also highlight along with my previous slide on chapter 4, which is it's a complicated world we are living in. You have to think about how machines are going to complement, displace, substitute human beings predicated on Turing tests and traps, but it's also about macro productivity conversations, especially also in a world where the demographic dividend is very interesting right now in the world. The Western countries are slowing down in terms of their total fertility rate. They're anti-immigration. The Eastern countries are more younger. So the Western countries are very quickly adopting the machines, whereas the Eastern countries are thinking, with my young population, how do I give them job in a world where the standard is being set by the global North? And the global South seems to be like only playing catch up. And this is where I would encourage everyone to think about forming a global South axis, because otherwise you will be told what to do in this industrial evolution itself, rather than you making a statement about how you want to do it such that it's inclusive and such that it pays attention to the grand challenges of the global South. Okay, I'm talking a lot. I'll take a lot of questions. I'll try to finish up quickly for those who have to reach out after the room. But let me continue, okay? Now, in all these micro and macro conversations, I think a big story is of ethics, responsibility, and whether AI will result in inequality. The IMF has a very interesting report out, I think, a couple of years back on maybe this will have unintended consequences between rich and poor nations. The rich nations will become richer. The poor nations will not be able to transition in the twin transition world that we talk in. They will only do a catching up, and this will create larger disparities, especially in a world where every country, poor or rich, are struggling with big public debts post the pandemic, right? So this is something we want to keep an eye out in terms of AI and inequality in a broader sense. There's also a story to be told about how do you think about ethics in this and responsibility in the AI world? So there are three things here. One is a story of distributional consequences. There was a book called The Idea of Justice by Amartya Sen, where he has a paradox called the flute paradox. Okay, the flute paradox is Sen's way of saying that when you have a new innovation coming into society, there is always a tussle between the flute maker, the flute music producer, and somebody who will get a great living by playing music on the flute. So there are all these three types of stakeholders when you have a flute lying on the floor. And Sen basically says that what is then a just way to distribute the gains from flute to society, all right? And this essentially is the conversation that we are also starting to see in the artificial intelligence world, where we are struggling between who should get the biggest gains from artificial intelligence, the flute in this context, the ones who are making it, OpenAIs of the world, the ones who are going to create lovely creative outputs out of it, or the ones who actually need it to solve, like make a good living out of it, right? And this is where the policymaker will have to play an important role. The other important thing to think about is the danger of expert systems like AI taking over experts and then creating pseudo experts. Okay, and this is a conversation that we have seen in the social media world. where you have the Facebook suddenly making everybody a woke activist, da da da, right? So if you have a doctor who is going to be completely displaced by an X-ray, which plugged into ChatGPT is going to give you a treatment protocol, you will start behaving as if you are like a doctor. And this will create the Dunning-Kruger syndrome in society. The Dunning-Kruger syndrome in society is basically less of education, lots of confidence, and that creates complications in the way you are going to solve, especially diseases where you have human life and death and living consequences. And that's something to keep an eye out in the ethical conversation as well. The last point is Michael Sandel's, the Harvard ethicist, his point around the trolley problem. So the trolley problem, I'm not showing the video here. The trolley problem is basically whether a mechanical trolley with a pulley system can be handled by a human being versus an automata to decide which particular rail track they would be going into, killing a few versus killing a lot many. And with the advent of electric vehicles, the Teslas of the world, and I saw a BYD car on the Ahmedabad road, by the way, these days. So you can see all these roads coming, all these electric vehicles and robots coming into space. It might create a trolley problem situation where there are adverse consequences of adopting automation, and then you have to think about the response of society to it and the insurance and the liability regime around it. So these are complicated conversations that the policymaker has to solve beyond the trust issue that I highlighted in the previous slides. And to be honest, I don't think people are more forthfully talking about it, because AI and the health and the development story is basically captured by three types of folks. One are the technologists, second are the lawyers, and third are the politicians. But we need more science-based conversations in informing these debates and frictions where there are open-ended questions with cultural issues in this story. The Chinese will not respond the way the Indian will, and the Indians will not respond the way the British guy will in the digital mental health context, for example. And we need to pay attention to science also to create the trust and solve the market failure as well. That's my humble submission in chapter 5. Now, obviously, we are then coming into a world where we are going to constantly talk about human-computer interaction. My PhD is from Carnegie Mellon University, and many years back when I was finishing it, I was already seeing CMU is the hotbed along with MIT and Stanford for computer science interventions. And there was a department of human-computer interaction already. And I was always used to think, like, what is the story of human-computer interaction? Now I know what HCI stands for. Like, we need the doctor to interact with the machines to create better health, etc., etc. So one interesting thing here beyond health, I don't know whether you can read this, but there's a lovely book by the Japanese author Kazuo Ishiguro, and I know you have a Japan Center, called Clara and the Sun, where in the world where we are all becoming very lonely and we are so hooked into our phones, Clara basically gets artificial intelligence friend and talks about what happens to the human heart. We have children at home who are so plugged into our devices, they don't need the parents around them. In fact, they give you some very direct quips. It starts thinking like what's happening to the human mind and brain combination along with the heart. So I wanted to highlight that because especially in a context of health, there's a conversation to be had about human instinct, human intuition, empathy, the placebo feeling when you talk to a nice doctor, etc., etc. Will that be achievable through a AI intervention? I don't know. Maybe they will be able to create a more sentient AI intervention that will do it. Maybe there's already work happening in this in some secretive laboratory of Google, da da da. But that's something to keep an eye on while thinking about AI, global health, and development. I can tell you the one thing, which is that there's a very interesting tension happening here between Western manufacturers of automation intervention in health and Eastern manufacturers of automation and health. So about 6 hours away from here is a company called Merrill Life Sciences in Vapi, and they do amazing med devices. And we know that Gujarat has historical capabilities in diamonds manufacturing. Some of those capabilities transition into med devices. And Merrill is basically a competitor of a lot of Western manufacturers in certain medical devices play. Okay, just like in AI, you have robotic surgeons coming from a company called Intuitive, which is trying to sell out its robotic surgeons around the world, including in India. but they're facing the pushback from local manufacturers. So 2 years back, I was in Peking University. They have a big medical school, and the CEO of Peking Asia, Intuitive Asia, was trying to argue that pick up my machine. It has 400 patents, so it has a strong monopoly, not the local Chinese version of the robotic surgeon. And the Peking doctors were trying to argue with the CEO that, well, you might show me all kinds of evidence that lesser length of stay, better outcomes, but my machine is doing pretty decent a job. Here are some counter evidences. So you can already see some political economy and competitive dynamics conversations here in the robotic surgery space, and I expect more of that to come in other spaces as well. Okay, so human computer interaction from a technology side, yes, but from the market side, from the economic side, I think we need to keep an eye on how we are working with machines, and what is the nature of the competitive dynamics at play. That is something to be watchful about going forward, because if you go back to the history of how industrial revolutions have happened, human beings have resisted machines. The Luddites fought against the textile machinery. We are talking about textiles in Ahmedabad's history here. And also when the railway lines came in or the internet came in, there was a lot of pushback societally. So there's a conversation to be had here about sociologically what happens to global health and development with human computer interaction. That's chapter 6. Coming back to health, wealth, and happy India, all right? So the idea is that simple. There was an interesting Hindu campaign some time back. It's talking about, I mean, if you open up the newspapers and the TVs locally these days, it's all about all kinds of weird news, crime, all kinds of decisions people are making, they're suffering. I'm pretty sure the policymaker and the lawyers and the societal custodians are pondering like what's happening to the country in terms of the happiness quotient, right? And happiness is something that can come through, I think, if you stay engaged with your mind in productive capacity. Otherwise, you feel like all over the place, right? So the idea of it goes back to my previous submission, that if you create a healthy India, will be household wise and economically productive, creating wealth, and that may transition into a happy India. This is like Sen's and Bhutan's model of a gross national happiness index rather than not just a GDP index that I want to humbly write about a little bit. The ideas are a little scattered, but you get the drift. Healthy, wealthy, and happy India using AI as a potential intervention in that direction of travel. How do we do it? Well, the way to do it is not silos. The way to do it is not like, oh, health is there, hospitals, doctors, policymakers there, technologists here, and then society there. It's about coming together and creating a interdisciplinary conversation around one world, one AI, and one health. Choices to be made between an American type of an AI ecosystem or a Chinese type of an ecosystem or India's own ecosystem, right? When DeepSeek was launched, Servam AI was also launched as an LLM alternative, but Servam AI did not really fly in that sense. At that same time, I know that there's work going on in different ISCs and IITs of the world where they're trying to create their new LLMs that will be very India oriented, given our own cultural and societal contexts. So we want to think about conversations that are interdisciplinary, where public, private, science, non-science entities, geographies. Why should Ahmedabad just be sitting with Ahmedabad and its history of pharma? Why can't it talk to Bangalore software ecosystem and create new solutions? That's my point about breaking the silos. Okay, I was at the TCS 50th year in UK Innovation Conference a month back. And they were talking about working with Southampton NHS about some new interventions they are coming on the electronic medical records. And I was like, why should TCS not be talking with Fortis or AIMS to create solutions for India? Maybe they are, I don't know. But the point is exactly that we want to come out of like, oh, I do these things this way because we are Western India. They do these things because they are like that in Southern India. Eastern India has its own idiosyncrasies. Northern has its own idiosyncrasies. We don't ever come out of our silos and do our interdisciplinary conversations in our places of comparative advantages. And I think AMA has that potential to show the leadership, not just in a within country context, but even in a within global south context. So just as an aside, I was actually chatting with colleagues in South Africa, in Brazil, in China. Everybody is actually looking post-pandemic at India and its health innovation ecosystem. What will it do to make sure that the lessons learned from the pandemic are not repeated for the next pandemic. And in that world, why can't AMA be a fulcrum for a Institute for Global South Health Innovation AI conversation, right? That's something to think about going forward in terms of breaking the silos, having interdisciplinary conversations. While doing that, we also have to be mindful of snake oil. Every time some new stuff comes in, people sell snake oils, right? And here I want to encourage all of you to read this book by Arvind Narayanan and Sayesh Kapoor at Princeton, which talks about all this hype that has happened in especially health context, super important, right? And the snake oil story comes from this artificial intelligence hype cycle, especially relevant for health. So the artificial intelligence hype cycle shows how expectations change over time, generally for artificial intelligence. You enter into world of peak of inflated expectations. Like once ChatGPT was launched, my life as an academic changed. I teaching AI and policies changed. And then there were interventions. Sora came in, this Perplexity came in, Claude came in, Google Notebook came in. My profession as a economic scientist is going through its own transitions, because now you don't not need human beings to write papers. AI can write the papers for you. AI can do the peer reviewing for you. So journals are struggling with whether you can trust the science that's getting generated with this AI. So all kinds of stuff is happening with the hype cycle story, right? So we want to be very careful about the snake oil that is potentially getting peddled, and create even more burden for critical thinking, the why and the how and who and what, so what kind of questions that needs to come down to education and curriculums, etc. um, Finally, something around global digital health amidst global geopolitics, right? So there's a big conversation to be had around how politics plays into health, at the micro level and also at the macro level. I know that the WHO R&D Center is here nearby. Post-pandemic, we saw what WHO did or did not do during and post the pandemic. I think the basic message here is that as we do more digital health in the world of AI, and hope that gives us economic development gains in a sustainable, inclusive fashion, we go back to Gandhiji, talking about optimization of how we can live as human beings, not just run after greed, but just thinking about living in a humble sense. The classic Japanese philosophies, for example, that can aid the conversation amidst the global geopolitics. One interesting aside here is the AI interventionists, OpenAI's, Google, Gemini AI of the world, are running out of data. So they are after all these global south economies like India, Bangladesh, for synthetic data so that they can train their next interventions. And you can see a lot of push coming from OpenAI and to open themselves in a lazy fashion, potentially, I would argue, such that they can get the new data coming out from these contexts like India and South Asia. We need to be mindful of that, because that's basically a representation of human greed. What we may not require, if we are thinking about just human need, is a submission I would like to make in chapter 9. And lastly, let's not forget it's about health and whether we care about human beings, our fellow human beings. So there's a lovely book by K. Sujata Rao, former Secretary of Health of India. It's called Do We Care? It's basically our way of handling health in our societies. Not just Gujarat, Ahmedabad, or India, but anywhere else. Keeps happening. We look the other way. We don't care, it seems, about bad consequences in society. Just this morning, I was talking with a friend. Anganwadis in Gujarat, this is on the Gujarati TV actually, they, I think, 1,000+ children are not getting milk supplies because bureaucracy is creating paperwork problems. The question is, how are we going to accept, if AI can give us quicker solutions to solve the bureaucratic frictions, why should we not be adopting it? What kind of continuing education can be done such that bureaucrats can be complemented with AI interventions? That's something to think about. And especially for the vulnerable in society. I have this paper accepted last week on geriatric populations. We all have parents at home. They are not always part of the, let's say, the national or the state level health insurance systems, let's say for cataract care. And we see that story with the eye care system where the elderly are not getting fully covered in the context of health insurance, whether it's state level or national level. So I have another paper where we are saying that if you give money in the hands of women, they're not spending that money in the hands of for their own wellness. They're actually spending it for the rest of the family. So these are some interesting conversations about vulnerable in societies like ours, which need to be attended to while we are thinking about AI and interventions and health insurance and universal health coverage, that we cannot forget in a broader conversation on whether we care as society. So overall, I go back to Martin Luther King and what he talked about inequality. He saw that of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhuman one. Okay, and this happened during vaccine nationalism in various countries, including in South Africa. The Africans are really upset the way Pfizer's and the mRNAs of the world treated them. Only 17% got vaccinated in some sense, and they don't want to feel that shortchanged when the next pandemic coming around. So my submission is for India to do the healthcare leadership that the BRIC ecosystem might require, and form a new axis for healthcare leadership in this AI world, such that it's about sustainable development, such that it's about solving inequality and economic development, driven by science, driven by innovation, and driven by responsible ethical AI. That's that. That's a picture of tuberculosis X-ray. These days, they're talking about catching tuberculosis quickly with AI. And if you can catch tuberculosis early, you can solve it in some sense. You don't need to like run for a vaccine. The vaccine might have a patent with a Western manufacturer. Then you have to think about how to price the tuberculosis product. Anyway, so that's my submission in terms of the chapters for this study. And I'm now this lecture. And I'm now very happy to take some questions from you on my disparate set of thoughts around AI, health, and Indian economic development. Yes, sir. Immature.
We need to have a mechanism like Niti where we should identify as to what areas we should focus on for implementing AI solutions. Number one. Number two is we should not go by the publicity of vendors. For example, DeepSeek has something to say. Western manufacturers will have something to say. We need to have a customized model which is applicable to our country. In the ideal situation would be we could look at how Chinese have done. Because as far as the population is concerned, we are almost 90%. So I would submit this, and the main implication would be litigation aspect.
Absolutely.
If what happens if an AI tool fails, we are not thought of in India. So that's why I'm saying that we must have a proper infrastructure before jumping into some propaganda.
I totally agree with you. I don't differ with you at all. And in fact, I would say we need a national twin transition body where we do digitization of India. We have our lessons to take from FinTech. We have our lessons to take from Aadhaar. But let's take also the potential failures there and make sure that our AI transition is more sustainable, more responsible, inclusive. And at the same time, there are private conversations to be attended to because the computational needs that will come as we transition as a digital society is also enormous. So this is a conversation that I think has to happen at Delhi and then mitigated into our conversation around the different states. Now the complication here is that right to health is a state subject. We know the problems of trying to do PMJ in certain states which have still not adopted PMJ, whereas the rest of the country has adopted. So how do we blend in this legality point that you mentioned on the national twin transition strategy? I don't know, but that's the way forward. Otherwise, we will have to basically feed what is given on the plate. OpenAI will give us some solutions, we'll just, as latecomers, latch onto that party. Or DeepSeek has given us some solution, and as latecomers, we'll latch onto that party. We don't want to repeat that story. We want to be the first movers like we are with Aadhaar and RuPay and UPI, such that we can then export out these lessons to the other parts of the developing world. And I can bring you as a national academic, the Chinese are looking at us to set these standards, the Brazilians are looking at us, South Africans are looking at us, other populous economies are looking at us, like Indonesia, etc. So this is the right time to start work on this. And I think Ahmedabad has an amazing history of life sciences and healthcare and R&D during Dr. Sarabhai's orientation post-independence. So why not start it from here is my hope and aspiration. So, all right, let's take. Can I get you? Is that okay? Or okay, you go ahead and then you take it.
As you know, we have got.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm a radiologist myself.
Sorry?
I'm a radiologist myself. And I came to attend this only 2 hours, knowing that you'll be talking about access. I'm an old school man, maybe you can say. Whatever you said about the things, one of the branch which we always say is a clinical radiologist. Today's any young radiologist doesn't go to the patient, they don't know the patient, they don't know the face of the patient. They just see the screen, type the report, and pass it. So clinical radiology, that is the most important for the doctor, is empathy to the patient, to the human being. AI will come afterwards. We are forgetting that everything is in AI. Especially in radiology, I have seen, because last 20 years this is going on. We have also been a part of those studies. And we have seen that no, not everything is there. If it was something like that, in UK and USA, you have traveled everywhere, everybody must have traveled. To get one simple X-ray chest done may take 3-4 weeks.
Absolutely.
And may even take 3-4 weeks to get the report. Where is the AI? It's empathy.
Another 3-4 weeks for the doctor to call it.
Yes.
To discuss the.
And if it is a positive, then only. If it's a negative, then you just guess. Even in the USA, one of my friends, radiologists, eminent radiologists, could not get an appointment for sonography for 3 weeks. He came here and he did the sonography in my place. So what I'm talking about is empathy. Very we need. Emotions should be involved with that. And by the way, radiologists are now not seeing only the images. We do interventional. We unclog the artery to the morning diaphragm. We put the block in the artery to reduce the size of the mass. So we have evolved. The whole radiology has evolved, the medicine has evolved. So what I'm trying to say is that AI is not everything. 2 or 3 of my friends who are clinicians, they have put a board outside that if there's any Google question, you will be charged 500. And the last thing I'm sorry to say, that this particular assay doesn't show any tuberculosis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I hope my father is watching because he is an otolaryngologist and he would love your comments. Because he holds similar points. As I said, as a health economist, I totally share your views that it's about human beings first, human health first, and then comes interaction with the machine, which I was trying to argue as well. There's no debate on your points as well as my points. My point is about how to manage the transition and the speed of transition and continuing education. Medical education itself is also changing. We are wearing all these metaverse goggles and anatomy education, etc. is changing. I know that in Sussex as well. So you have to see how that curriculum downstream in context like ours. How do we bring in human empathy in that conversation, which is where the complementation between human beings and machines is so important to have a conversation on. If you remember, my topic was code, care, and curve. So maybe I should say that it should not be that, it should be care, code, and curve. So we can change the topic and make sure what is important in this conversation. But I love your intervention. Thank you.
Yeah. Healthcare in the US has gone for a 6, as I would like to say. At this point of time, 19 to 20% of GDP goes for healthcare. And yet we are not seeing any significant improvement in physical health. You see, the field of health is not only physical, it is covering a whole lot of other facets. And that's why National Health Policy of India 2017 talks of 5 aspects of health. Starts with preventive, promotive, curative, rehabilitative, and palliative. allopathic system of medicine as we are practicing is recommended mainly for the curative part. Preventive and promotive, there is very little say in the allopathic system. And then rehabilitative and palliative, obviously there are other systems that are doing better. So in the policy here in India, NHP 2017, there is a recommendation and urge to combine Ayush and allopathy together if you want to have integrative holistic health. And as you know, WHO has partnered India and they have created Global Center for Traditional Medicine in Jamnagar. I think this is the opportunity for us to really see how we can bring the two together. I would like to say homeopathy, for example, is eminently suited for artificial intelligence. In the field of homeopathy, you have to take the kind of a case which consumes good amount of time. That particular part can be very well handled by artificial intelligence, and the rest can be done by AI. In my opinion, we don't have to get bamboozled with what is happening, but we have to combine the two things and look at the benefits that will come through artificial intelligence, which will take out a whole lot of repetitive work, which is to be done. And then using the discretion, using the buddhi, using the kind of intelligence, there should be a proper solution given to the people. Last but not the least, public health is not receiving much attention except for vaccines. It is said that vaccines is the only solution for public health. It's not correct. WHO is failing in its duty all throughout by putting all their trust on vaccines, which are, to be very frank with you, I mean, for viruses, they are of very, very variable and very suspicious kind of, success. We have seen that in COVID and we have seen in others. So, my question to you is, how do we use AI for public health in a manner that will be low cost, inclusive, and affordable for the people? Thank you.
The simple answer, you have to generate trust. Okay, you have to generate trust whether it's about Ayush can complement allopathic medicine. You have to generate trust whether AI can help in public health. And the question is, how do we generate trust? I think the only way we can think about generating trust is through science. And then you have to create an architecture for evidence based medicine. These evidence-based medicine techniques will require, I mean, now you can think about small trials, large trials, intermediate trials. You can think about simulated trials in a world where you don't actually experiment it on animals or human beings. But you need science for trust. And then you also have to have the creative energies to intervene, whether it's radiology or Ayush or public health or vaccine conversation. Because without the innovation, the science is meaningless. You are going to basically test an intervention, but before that you have the intervention in play. So you have to have that innovation work, and innovation work is not going to come out. So it's a national innovation system conversation. It's not going to come from a private body per se. It can't come on a entrepreneurs per se. The public education ecosystem has a very important role to play. Our science and tech universities has to play an important role. And that's where innovation is going to come from. And the last part of the story is trust is also predicated around privacy. So health data, people are going to share data with a little bit of caution, right? God knows who is using that data for what purposes. Like in UK NHS, they're outsourcing some subsample of the data to Palantir Technologies, a Silicon Valley firm, for creating predictive machines. But many Britishers are upset that why is a non-British company getting access to this? So therefore you get this conversation, we run into this conversation of how you are going to create national health security and privacy blended with innovation, blended with science, such that you run into trust, whether it's for Ayush, whether it's for radiology, whether it's for a pigeon, whether it's for ChatGPT giving you a treatment pathway. I think that's what we need to focus all the energies and conversations on. And we go back into trust for the legal and the national policy conversations the first gentleman asked then. Okay, that's my view. As a trust is not something which is a purely economic concept, by the way. There's an element of law here, there's an element, it's a very interdisciplinary idea. There's an element of psychology here, there's an element of sociology here. So you'll have to think about an interdisciplinary framework through we can generate trust in these conversations. Yes. Sorry, you want a business idea for an Andhra Pradesh entrepreneur? You mean you need my ideas? Let's take that offline. There's so many things to solve. Let's put it that way. Let's take that gentleman and then we'll come to the other. Yeah.
I have a topic that is my mind. The most important that with any new technology or evolution, the first that comes into fear, resist. But I think we in India, we need to really, at least this one, we need to evolve ourselves. We need to start using it, the technology. We need to start learning and using and creating our own tech. We need to lead. Why are we followers?
That's why frustration too, which is why I love, like, very excitedly took up this job of this lecture and this topic.
Let's have their own.
So the people listen to us and say that why are we taking it with fear? Let's embrace it. Let's think about how science can give us the trust. And as India, we have a long history in our civilization to embrace new things, not just the local, recent, frugal stories that we see in entrepreneurship or business model. So I would say that India has to play the lead in embracing what we are just arguing for.
That is the first point. That why not we become aggressive? Why not we create our own AI? And you said that it has become private can create. Why cannot?
No, private can create. The question is, where is it? Exactly, that is it.
Yeah. So I think it's impossible.
I'll give you an anecdote on private efforts here. So I can't name the actors in this story, but there's a big multi-speciality hospital system which is looking around and seeing what EMR is doing with predictive algorithms. And is thinking about how can I create new predictive algorithms such that I can slowly displace my superstar physicians. As you know, these private health systems is a big salary cost for superstar physicians. So the less they can lessen the dependence on such superstar clinicians, better are their profit margins in some sense. Now, the approach that they're taking is reaching out to some IIT professor who's a friend of mine, saying, hey, can you create a quick like LLM that will take some sample of my medical records and give me some solutions in that space? And I was telling my friend that you should properly do this if you want to do this, but make sure that it's scientifically validated because there's a responsibility aspect to this conversation. Or ask them, why aren't you doing it with a TCS or a Microsoft of the world? Why aren't you doing it with a cheap kind of a quick solution, Dubar solution, right? That's the philosophical orientation around the trust point that I was making earlier, that if you don't really trust it, you're basically trying to think that you can some quick question and high touch solutions on medical records and AI. And tomorrow that will potentially create unintended consequences, legal complications, insurance issues. So we have to, I totally give you that we have to change societal orientation towards more trust that is science, innovation, and privacy driven, and that are more sustainable and long run in these conversations. Does that make sense?
Yes. What we can see is
So, incidentally, I'm a doctor and I'm associated with a startup company of developing an AI for healthcare. So, I think I understood the questions and the points of everyone what they talk about. One thing which is completely untouched. I think people are talking about business, science, clinics, and this and that, but is regulatory aspects. Regulatory means because the main challenge what we are facing is that as Sir has said that we should combine all these allopathy, modern medicine, and homeopathy and everything together. But one thing which is, I think, Indian regulatory and US and Europe, all they are talking about is that it has to be supervised by the human being. So today, if I treat a patient, as you said, a diabetes patient, for example, and if I give everything to AI, but who is liable for the side effects or any damage happens to the patient? Obviously not AI. It is a doctor who is looking at that. So I think the regulatory is still making mandatory steps. Yeah, it is making mandatory that doctor has to be there, though you are using AI. So doctor, at least for time being, is not going to be obsolete. They are going to be there. At least they will be sitting in front of AI just to make signature or whatever it is like that. The second thing, sir, just pointed to, we are making a draft and we are responding to the regulatory queries, which they are raising it. That how you are going to describe the benefit risk profile of your system, And so yeah. So I think by chance any comment, of course you are noticed, by any comment of yours on regulatory of AI.
Many comments. I can go on and on regulation and economics. Okay, that's why we have the circle around policymakers. That's why I had a lovely chat with Mr. Sarabhai before coming in about insurance systems and fragmented regulation. The point about regulation is that there are 4 or 5 things at least to think about. One is how to approve digital therapeutics. USFDA has already made advances here. EMA is catching up quickly. China has its own story, Japan has its own story, India, God knows how our MDs were. But you can already see in that point that there are non-harmonized direction of travel. Are we going to allow the USFDA to dictate to us how we are going to think about AI-led devices? Or are we going to build our own standards for trials and evidence and post-launch pharmacovigilance systems? That's something to think about. So that's on launch. The second regulatory aspect is the insurance part of the story. How do you think about adopting to new interventions that are AI-driven and bring it in the PMJ or the local state in health insurance? A third part is around pricing regulation. So as products and services come out which are AI driven, you probably have to think about whether it's excluding people or it's including people as part of the health insurance system. And the last part is competition. So depending on who is there as an entrepreneur, you would want to file patents and POPs and create a monopoly, but that could be problematic for society. Competition Commission of India can come in and say that you are not going to be allowed to play in that certain fashion. So you will always face these regulatory pressures in the antitrust space, whether you're a local entrepreneur or a multinational company. So there are these various aspects that need to be sorted through along with intellectual property also. Because you are using certainly putting your algorithms on data that's coming out from wherever. So you already know that OpenAI is fighting with my New York Times because it took up all this information. I just saw that Perplexity invited AR Rahman to its offices. So it's trying to do some sort of handshake with the creative artists there to create stories there, which will have interesting conversations on IT, intellectual property regulation. It's a complex mesh. As I said, I can go on and on regulation and in this conversation. For the moment, all I can say is that market failure has to be solved to make sure we can trust AI regulation. And there we need a story where conversations around regulation are harmonized and evidence driven.
Hello, sir.
Sir,
Hello.
Could you give us one example where AI is
Sir, please ask.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Sir, in the future we will be needing more and more AI engineers. So, when should we get into AI? In a undergraduate course or in a postgraduate course?
Maybe in the surprise.
my taste is not to get into it too quick, sir, because you still need the basics right, critical thinking abilities right, physics, maths, economics, biology, understanding of our civics and societal responsibility, and then get into AI. But the direction of travel in many universities around the world is bringing AI to primary education, secondary education, and higher education very quickly. Especially, let's say some of the Middle Eastern economies are now letting OpenAI run on primary, secondary, and tertiary education. So you may not be able to see what my taste is, and you'll have to perhaps adapt into a new equilibrium for curriculums where AI is everywhere. And there will be some short-term implications of that for societal ability to critically think, ask the right questions, etc. But hopefully, in the long run, we will learn about it. And our children, I also have a 10-year-old at home, they will be able to bring more nuanced cognitive tasks to the story. There's a recent MIT study circulating that in a world where ChatGPT is doing everything for you, the kids are just not willing to think enough. Why should they solve the problematic simultaneous equations like Mr. Saraway and me were talking when ChatGPT solves it for you, right? So in that world, then there will be potentially some new equilibrium will run into our mathematical critical thinking abilities. Perhaps it will be banned. Many universities are clamping down saying we go back to paper pencil interventions. Perhaps it will be embraced, like universities in the UAE, etc. So the verdict is still not out there. But I think that for human, like somebody was saying, it's about human beings taking the help of machines to improve our productivity and our life and our happiness. at some point, we will end up in a story of revisiting the lazy race in AI that we are running, generally in society and also for AI, where regulation comes into play, where standards come into play. I am asked to talk about a little bit of my study around how there's an interesting puzzle that is coming from like a new paper that I'm writing. So the paper that I'm writing is showing that, and there's an AI aspect to this. It's showing that when women are given more cash in their hand through a policy change in India, they are not really spending it on themselves. Okay? And this is what we are seeing in two types of data sets. One is the electronic medical record data set from the Prasad Eye Institute in Hyderabad, and also in the CMI CPHS data sets. The question is, what are women doing then? In the data, we are seeing that they are spending it on children's education, some of their other nutritional, preventive health needs, etc., not on getting themselves treated in hospitals, doing their checks, etc., etc. Now, if this is a puzzle, can we feed this information into artificial intelligence and create more sustainable, normative health policies that attend to the vulnerable that I was talking in the last slide? Not just for women, but also for how, let's say, the elderly are getting excluded from health insurance system. This is the way AI for good. You will see this terminology circulating in social media. AI for good. This is how we should be trying to think about using AI as a society like we are in India, rather than AI for the heck of AI, the snake oil story, right? So this is my humble argumentation today, that we would think about AI to make our lives better, not because AI is coming and some fancy entrepreneur sitting somewhere in the world is saying, hey, adopt it and we'll get you a personal doctor in this conversation.
Great, sir. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you. I think,
Maybe one last question.
maybe one last question we can take.
Maybe two. Okay, quickly.
My name is Vijay. I work on mental health. My question is, demographic dividend is supposed to be India's advantage. How can we make it not a disadvantage, knowing that our healthcare is a problem, mental health is increasing, and we cannot apply the Western model that is decreasing life expectancy with increasing cost.
How can we do what?
How can we protect our demographic dividend, which is supposed to be our advantage?
My wife should have been here. She is finishing her PhD dissertation on digital mental health in Sussex. And her dissertation is showing that, again, we go back to science, innovation, and privacy. She had interviewed about 20 entrepreneurs in India and China. And the conversation there has already been that, yes, there is a business model conversation, but we also have to destigmatize mental health. We have to think about adopting this intervention in the health insurance system, and also about the privacy of data that people are sharing when they're working with digital mental health platforms. And these conversations are different from China and India. China is far more top-down and technology driven. India is far more societally driven, and the frictions locally and the stigma and the culture issues. Men are not reporting mental health issues as much as women are, etc., etc. So Sangat and others, there are other specialists here who should chime in how to do it properly. But when you see like AI chatbots being your therapist, you start getting a lot in that conversation, because God knows what kind of advice they're giving. I have like close relatives who are going through episodes in this context, and they worry about it in terms of they're not visiting the therapist properly, and then there is ChatGPT on their phones. God knows what they're doing with themselves in this one. So we go back to the point of trust also here in the digital health context. So you and we can wrap up.
Whether it's India or the developing world, the burden of disease is primarily at primary healthcare centers. And if that is not managed, subsequently we'll land up in a kind of greater problems in what India has faced so far and many developing countries. Has there been any success story of AI in primary healthcare?
Yes. Yes. The short answer is yes. I should have mentioned it earlier. The two I know of is a company I'm working with called ThinkMD, which is basically coming out from University of Vermont. And it is an app that has trained itself on 260 disease condition use cases that can complement healthcare workers in the primary health context, and has been shown to be very much complementing the presence of ASHA workers, let's say in India, for betterment of health outcomes. There are RCTs, experiments out there in Ghana, Nigeria, Bangladesh, that the Think MD app is doing excellently well. And I think there are Indian versions of this also that ASHA workers are using. There's a group in the Sundarban area in West Bengal who are using not as fancy as Think MD, but some own homegrown solution to complement health workers in Sundarbans area because reaching places in villages are problem. That's a problem. That is very reminiscent of a Think MD kind of solution. The other place to think about is a paper I wrote with Aparna Hegde when I was in IMA actually in the middle of the pandemic. It's on maternal health by a startup called Arman in Mumbai. It was a text messaging app which helps women, especially in breastfeeding settings, go through a proper nutritional and caring strategy through the 9 months of pregnancy. Now, Aparna has made it more fancy now and is also scaling through the national Kilkari program, which is using more intelligent techniques and trained algorithms to help less privileged people in the primary health segment going through the maternal health context. So there are interventions out there where primary health is getting complemented with AI solutions such that it catches diseases early and reduces the burden of disease. So yes, so that's it. Can we wrap up, sir? I think otherwise everyone will get angry.
Fabulous, absolutely. The presentation was so articulated so well that there is a lot of engagement that he had. Certainly the concerns we rightly mentioned that especially in the medical space and then you did mention the injustice in healthcare, but apart from that, what you said, AI for good, and that is probably coming out of a fear. People are afraid that this AI actually is going to be for good or not that majority of the AI. We know there are so many applications, but thank you for the one good advice that you've given us is getting the AMA 2.0 also, and how AMA can play an important role in and whatever we have discussed and in whatever way that we can be doing. And of course, the professor mentioned healthy, wealthy, happy India. But then there was also our what we used to say healthy, wealthy, and wise. So hopefully there would also be added wise India. And then what we do. I had a question, but I think that question will keep it over. You mentioned that this will only create rich countries, richer, poor countries, and widen the gap. So where would be India? India is not rich, but then huge consumption. So it's going to be a big part of the story of AI, though it is not the originality in having the AI of its own. But probably that would be one area where India would be neither here nor there, or here and there. Would be.
I think quickly.
Yes, please.
On the supply side, we have great potential to open the world some solutions. So new jobs, new interventions. On the demand side, we have all these unique challenges, maternal health, tuberculosis, cancer, where we can really solve some of these primary and secondary health and tertiary health problems. So we should be, I'm positive, let's put it that way, both the supply and demand side for India, not just for itself, but for the world.
Yeah, supply and demand side both. So supply as much we can say. So scientists are working on it, or the brains are working on it. But one important thing you mentioned is human heart. There's a diminishing kind of human heart by itself in terms of the heart, not as a organ, but it's going to be this AI is going to play a role where the actual emotions. You can also say the empathy. And the doctor, the purpose of doctor is not just to write a report. The purpose of the doctor is to make the patient feel that he is going to recover, and that's going to be a concern, and that's hard at every level. So thank you, sir. So happy that we have had you. We would like to have you again and again at the we will certainly reach out to you for anything that we have from this AMA 2.0 that we need any advice from you. But certainly please treat this as home wherever you are. We will organize a session for you. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. We look forward to having the 20th Dr. Anand Sanghi Memorial Lecture next year. Thank you.
એક વસ્તુ જે થયું છે એને રોકાવાનું નથી થવાનું છે એના પ્લસ માઇનસ બીજું કશું ના કરો ને તમે ભાઈ એક સપ્લિમેન્ટરી બી તરીકે યુઝ થશે જો નકરું એ આવ્યું છે બરાબર છે પેલો તો છે જ અને આ બી છે એટલે તમારા બેટા બી ડરશે એ જ એનો જે ફાયદો ખાઈને ધંધો કર્યો